New Year's Eve was always a big deal in our household. My wife, Ava, loved to host parties, and this year was no different. She'd been planning for weeks, invites, decorations, a menu that could rival a five-star restaurant. Ava had this ability to light up a room, and I was proud to call her my wife. We'd been married for 8 years, and though life had its ups and downs, I truly believed we were solid. At least, I thought so. As the party began, I found myself watching her flit around the room, laughing with friends and strangers alike. She was wearing this emerald green dress that hugged her figure perfectly, and her laughter carried above the music, contagious and beautiful. I spent most of the night mingling with our guests, catching up with old friends, and trying to ignore the nagging feeling of being a bit out of place in my own home. Ava was the social butterfly, not me. She was the reason we even had these lavish parties. I just went along for the ride. Midnight came faster than I'd expected. The countdown began, and as everyone shouted, "Happy New Year," I sought out Ava for our traditional New Year's kiss. But she wasn't where I'd last seen her. I scanned the room, a slight panic rising in my chest. Was she outside? Maybe upstairs? It wasn't like her to miss such a significant moment. What was supposed to be a joyful evening began to take on an edge I couldn't quite place. I moved through the house, weaving between guests who were either too drunk or too engrossed in their own conversations to notice my unease. The more I searched, the more unsettled I became. Ava was nowhere to be found. Her phone, usually glued to her hand, sat abandoned on the kitchen counter. I stepped outside, hoping to find her on the back patio, maybe catching a breath of fresh air. But the patio was empty, save for a couple of our friends laughing over cigars. One of them noticed me looking around. "You lose something, man?" he asked, grinning. I forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. "Just looking for Ava. Have you seen her?" He shook his head. "Not since the countdown. Maybe she went upstairs?" The suggestion didn't sit well with me. I hadn't considered that. Our bedroom was upstairs, and so was a quiet den where a few guests had wandered earlier to escape the noise. My stomach tightened as I made my way back inside. The music, the laughter, all of it felt muffled, distant. I climbed the stairs, my pulse quickening with each step. Our bedroom door was ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open gently, unsure of what I was about to find. Ava wasn't there, but the bedspread was rumpled, like someone had hastily sat down or leaned on it. My gaze fell on the dresser. Her favorite perfume bottle was tilted, as though someone had bumped into it in a hurry. The sound of hushed laughter reached my ears, coming from the den at the end of the hall. My heart raced as I approached the door. It was closed, and for a moment, I considered turning back. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was all nothing. But then I heard her voice. It wasn't the soft, familiar tone I knew. It was low, teasing, intimate. My blood ran cold. Another voice, a man's, responded, laughing softly. I didn't need to open the door to know what was happening on the other side. But I did. I had to. When I pushed the door open, I felt like I'd walked into a nightmare. Ava was sitting on the couch, her legs draped over another man's lap. His hand rested on her thigh, and the way they both froze at the sight of me told me everything I needed to know. Neither of them spoke. The air was thick with the unspoken, the undeniable truth. Ava's face went pale, her mouth opening as if to explain, but no words came out. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in the doorway. What is this?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Ava stood up, brushing her dress down like she could smooth away the betrayal. "It's not what it looks like," she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. The man, someone I didn't recognize, just another face from the party, stood as well, holding his hands up like I was about to attack him. "Hey man, I think we should all calm down." Calm down? The audacity of his words only fueled the storm brewing inside me. But instead of lashing out, I turned on my heel and left the room. Ava called after me, her voice desperate, but I didn't stop. The walls felt like they were closing in as I made my way downstairs and out the front door. The crisp night air hit me like a slap, and I stumbled into the street, gasping for breath. My world had just shattered, and I had no idea how to begin picking up the pieces. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. The street was quiet, the sounds of the party muffled behind closed doors. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I tried to process what had just happened. Ava had cheated. In my house. On New Year's Eve. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought was possible. My mind reeled, replaying the scene in the den over and over, each detail sharpening into focus. The way she looked at him. The way she didn't immediately pull away. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told me to cover it up? The car's engine hummed softly as I turned the key. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay parked on the street where every glance back toward the house felt like a knife in my chest. I needed to get away, to clear my head. The streets were mostly empty, everyone either at home or celebrating the start of a new year. It felt cruel, somehow, that the world could be so oblivious to my pain. Streetlights blurred as I drove, my vision clouded by a mix of anger and tears I refused to let fall. I wasn't ready to cry. Not yet. I ended up at the park where Ava and I used to come on our early dates, back when everything felt perfect. I parked near the old oak tree where we'd once carved our initials, a moment that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Stepping out of the car, I shoved my hands deep into my coat pockets and stared up at the sky. The stars were bright, indifferent to the chaos unraveling inside me. My breath fogged in the cold air, and for a moment, I let myself feel the weight of it all. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. How could she do this to me? To us? I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the screen, debating whether to call someone. Anyone. But who would I even talk to? My best friend, Jake, would probably tell me to leave her, but was that even what I wanted? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. A text came through as I stood there, the screen lighting up in the darkness. It was Ava. Please come home. We need to talk. Talk? About what? She'd already said more than enough by her actions. My thumb hovered over the screen, tempted to reply, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and leaned against the car, letting the cold seep into my bones. I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. Not tonight. But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. A plan began to form in the back of my mind, a way to confront the situation on my terms. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. If she wanted to talk, then we'd talk. But it would be on my time, and I would make sure she understood the full weight of what she'd done. I climbed back into the car and sat there for a while longer, the engine idling as I stared at the road ahead. My hands were steady now, the storm inside me shifting into something colder, more calculated. I drove home, my mind set on what I had to do next. When I pulled into the driveway, most of the guests had left. The house was quieter now, the muffled thrum of music barely audible through the walls. Ava must have sent everyone home. Or maybe they sensed the tension and left on their own. Either way, it didn't matter. The party was over, in every sense of the word. The front door creaked open, and the warm air hit me like a wall. Ava was waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed over her chest, her face pale. She looked nervous, her lips pressed tightly together as though she was trying to hold back a flood of words. "You came back," she said softly. I didn't respond. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The silence between us was suffocating, heavy with the unspoken truth. I took off my coat and hung it on the rack, deliberately avoiding her gaze. My hands felt strangely calm, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "Do we?" I asked coldly, finally meeting her eyes. "Because I think I saw enough back there to understand." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But she didn't. Instead, she took a shaky breath and stepped closer. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what I think. Then what was it, Ava? Enlighten me." She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "It was stupid. A mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. It didn't mean anything." Didn't mean anything? My voice rose, the anger I'd been holding back threatening to spill over. "You were sitting there with another man, Ava, his hand on your leg, laughing, whispering. And you're telling me it didn't mean anything? She flinched but held her ground. I wasn't going to let it go any further. I swear. The weight of her words hit me, and I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. So that's supposed to make me feel better? That you stopped before it got worse? How am I supposed to believe that when I can't even trust you anymore? Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care. Not now. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. Was this the first time? I asked, my voice cold and steady. She hesitated, and that pause was enough to shatter what little hope I had left. My stomach churned, and I could feel the walls closing in. Yes, she stammered. Yes, it was. I promise. It's not something I've ever done before, and I swear it'll never happen again. Her words sounded hollow, like she was reading from a script. I wanted to believe her, but the image of her with that man was seared into my mind, too vivid to ignore. Do you think that matters? I asked. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed us, Ava. You've destroyed me. Her tears spilled over, and she covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. I felt a pang of guilt, but I shoved it aside. She didn't deserve my pity. I need time, I said, my voice firm, to think, to figure out what happens next. Please, don't do this, she begged, her voice breaking. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this. I know we can. I shook my head, unable to look at her any longer. You should have thought about that before you let another man touch you. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it, my chest heaving. The weight of everything was crushing, but I refused to let it break me. Not yet. The guest room felt cold and foreign, even though I'd spent countless nights in there when work or life got in the way of our shared bed. Tonight, though, it wasn't just the room that felt unfamiliar. It was my entire life. The woman I had trusted most had shattered everything in a single evening. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, my mind racing. Every detail of the night replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't shut off. The way Ava laughed with him, the way she hesitated to answer my questions, the betrayal etched across her face when I caught them. How long had she been hiding this? Was this really the first time? Or just the first time I'd caught her? Unable to sit still, I grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over Jake's contact. He was my closest friend, the guy who always had my back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the fear of saying the words out loud and making them real. Instead, I opened the browser and started searching for, what? Answers? Validation? A guide on what to do when your wife betrays you at a New Year's party? The irony wasn't lost on me, turning to the internet like some lost teenager looking for advice. But I needed to do something. Anything to stop the growing ache in my chest. I stumbled across forums filled with stories that mirrored my own. Men and women pouring their hearts out about infidelity, about rebuilding trust, or deciding to walk away. Some stories ended in reconciliation, others in bitter divorces. None of them felt like they fit my situation. My marriage wasn't a story, it was my life. And it was falling apart. I barely noticed the hours passing. The sound of soft footsteps outside the door pulled me from my thoughts. There was a light knock, hesitant and quiet. Ethan? Ava's voice was shaky, almost timid. Are you awake? I didn't answer, hoping she'd take the hint. But she didn't. Please, can we just talk? I can't sleep, and her voice cracked. I can't stand this silence. The silence wasn't for her benefit. It was for mine. I needed to keep the walls up, to hold myself together. Still, something inside me caved. I got up and opened the door just enough to see her face, red and tear-streaked. What do you want, Ava? I asked, my voice flat. Her eyes searched mine, desperate. I can't stop thinking about what happened. I need you to know how sorry I am. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Sorry isn't going to fix this. I know. She stepped closer, but I didn't move. But I need you to believe me when I say it didn't mean anything. It was stupid and reckless, and I never should have. You think this is about what it meant? My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't hold it back. You broke my trust, Ava. You let someone else come between us in our house on our night. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel the usual urge to comfort her. I was too raw, too angry. I love you, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you, don't give up on us. I stared at her, searching for something in her eyes that would make this easier. Some spark of the woman I fell in love with. But all I saw was the person who had torn me apart. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Go to bed, Ava. She hesitated, but eventually nodded. Okay, she said softly, but I'm not giving up. I won't lose you. As she turned to leave, I closed the door and leaned against it, my head falling back with a heavy sigh. Her words echoed in my mind. I won't lose you. But what she didn't seem to understand was that she already had. The morning came too quickly, the sun's harsh light pouring through the blinds and dragging me out of a restless sleep. My head throbbed, not from drinking but from the sheer weight of everything I'd been carrying since last night. For a moment, as I stared at the ceiling, I let myself pretend it had all been a bad dream. But reality hit as soon as I stepped into the hallway. The faint smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen, a scent that once brought comfort but now only served as a reminder of the normalcy we'd lost. I debated staying in the guest room all day, hiding from her, from everything. But I couldn't. This wasn't something I could ignore. As I made my way downstairs, I saw her sitting at the dining table, a mug cradled in her hands. She looked like she hadn't slept either, her hair messy and her eyes puffy from crying. For a brief second, she looked up at me, hope flashing in her expression before quickly fading at the coldness in my stare. Good morning, she said quietly, her voice tentative. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed a cup from the cupboard and poured myself some coffee, the silence stretching between us. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, searching for any sign that I might be ready to talk. I made breakfast, she said, motioning toward a plate of toast and scrambled eggs on the counter. I'm not hungry, I muttered, taking a sip of coffee. The bitterness felt fitting. She stood, wringing her hands nervously. Ethan, please. We can't just not talk about this. I set the mug down harder than I intended, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. What do you want me to say, Ava? That I'm fine? That everything's okay? Because it's not. I know that, she said quickly, but we have to start somewhere. I need to explain. No, I interrupted, turning to face her. You don't need to explain anything. I already know enough. I saw enough. What's left to say? Her eyes welled up again, and she looked away, biting her lip. I made a mistake, Ethan. A horrible, awful mistake. I hate myself for it. Good, I said bluntly. You should. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't regret them. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand just how deeply she'd hurt me. I'll do anything, she said, her voice trembling. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You don't want to lose me? Ava, you already made that choice when you let him touch you. She flinched, the truth hitting her like a slap. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. Every second in her presence felt like a reminder of what I'd lost, what we'd lost. I need space, I said finally, my voice quieter now. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I can't be around you right now. Not like this. Her breath hitched, and she took a step toward me. Ethan, don't, I said sharply, holding up a hand. Just don't. I grabbed my jacket and keys, leaving the coffee untouched on the counter. The look on her face as I walked out the door was heartbreaking, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not now. Not yet. As I got into the car and drove away, I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to be anywhere but there. The weight of her betrayal was too much to bear, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to face her again. I drove aimlessly for over an hour, the roads blurring together as my thoughts churned. Every memory with Ava felt tainted now, corrupted by the image of her betrayal. The laughter we shared, the promises we made. It all seemed like a lie. I eventually found myself parked outside a familiar diner on the edge of town. a place I hadn't been to in years. It used to be our spot, back when Ava and I were first dating. We'd come here late at night, splitting a slice of pie and talking about everything and nothing. Sitting there now, alone, felt surreal. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside. The place hadn't changed much. Same red vinyl booths, same faint smell of coffee and grease. I slid into a booth near the back, grateful that the diner was mostly empty. A waitress approached, a warm smile on her face. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, black. And a slice of apple pie." She scribbled it down and disappeared, leaving me to stare out the window. The sky was overcast, gray clouds hanging low as if mirroring the heaviness in my chest. I thought about calling Jake again, but I still couldn't bring myself to do it. How do you even start a conversation like that? The waitress returned with my coffee and pie, setting them down with a gentle smile. "Anything else?" "No, this is fine. Thanks." I managed a weak smile, and she walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I took a sip of the coffee, letting the bitter warmth wash over me. My mind wandered to Ava's words that morning, her promises, her apologies. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow fix this. But another part, a darker part, couldn't shake the image of her with that man. Her betrayal wasn't just a crack in our relationship. It felt like an earthquake, leaving destruction in its wake. The sound of the door jingling pulled me from my thoughts. I glanced up to see a man I vaguely recognized, Dan, one of our mutual friends from college. He spotted me and raised a hand in greeting before making his way over. "Ethan? Wow, it's been a while." He slid into the booth across from me without waiting for an invitation. "What brings you here?" I hesitated, debating whether to brush him off or tell the truth. But something about his easy demeanor made me feel like I could let my guard down, even just a little. "Needed to get out of the house," I said finally. "Rough night." He nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, I get that. Everything okay?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Not really. Found out my wife was seeing someone else." Dan's eyes widened. "What? Ava? Man, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say." "Join the club," I muttered, taking another sip of coffee. He sat back, rubbing the back of his neck. "You want some advice? Or just someone to listen?" The offer surprised me. Dan and I hadn't been particularly close, but in that moment, his presence felt like a lifeline. "Honestly, I don't know what I need." "Well," he said, leaning forward, "you're allowed to be angry, to feel hurt. You don't have to figure it all out today. Take it one step at a time." His words were simple, but they resonated. I nodded, grateful for the small comfort. We talked for a while longer, about nothing in particular. Sports, work, memories from college. For the first time since the night before, I felt a flicker of normalcy, like maybe the world hadn't completely fallen apart. When Dan left, he clapped me on the shoulder. "Take care of yourself, man. And if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." I stayed a little longer, finishing my pie in silence. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt a little less suffocating. Maybe Dan was right. I didn't have to figure it all out today. I paid the bill and headed back to the car, the cold wind biting at my face. As I sat behind the wheel, staring at the empty road ahead, I realized I still didn't know what my next step was. But for now, I'd keep driving, taking it 1 mile at a time. By the time I returned home, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always had, warm, inviting, but it felt alien now, like I didn't belong there anymore. When I finally stepped inside, the house was quiet. Ava wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd left, unable to face me after everything. The idea stirred something unexpected in me, relief, tinged with sadness. But then I heard a faint rustling from upstairs. I found her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with a photo album in her lap. She looked up when I entered, her eyes swollen and red. "You're back." I didn't respond, closing the door behind me and leaning against it. She set the album aside, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back." Neither was I said honestly. She nodded, biting her lip. I know I don't have the right to ask, but can we talk? Please. Her voice was fragile, and for a moment, I hated how much I still cared. Against my better judgment, I nodded and sat down in the armchair across from her. Talk. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. I don't even know where to start. I've been replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how I let it get this far. And the truth is, I don't have an excuse. Her honesty caught me off guard. I expected excuses, deflection, anything but this. She looked down at her hands, tears spilling onto her cheeks. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I've been feeling lost, like I don't know who I am anymore. And instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst decision of my life. I leaned back in the chair, my arms crossed. You felt lost, so you thought another man would fix that? She flinched, and I saw the guilt etched into her face. No, it wasn't like that. He didn't mean anything to me, Ethan. I swear. It was a moment of weakness, and I hate myself for it. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold onto the shred of hope that this could be salvaged. But the other part, the part still reeling from the betrayal, couldn't let go of the anger. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice trembling with the weight of the truth. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not see what you did. Her sobs grew louder, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I looked away, unable to watch her break down. It wasn't just her pain. It was mine too, reflected back at me. I'll do whatever it takes, she said through her tears. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you, if you'll let me. Her words were earnest, but they didn't erase the image burned into my mind. I stood abruptly, needing space, needing air. I need time, Ava. I can't give you an answer right now. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need. Just don't shut me out completely. Please. I left the room without another word, retreating to the guest room once more. The walls felt closer this time, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a vice. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as the shadows deepened around me. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice. But worse than that were the questions that wouldn't stop haunting me. Was this really the first time? Could I trust anything she said anymore? And if I couldn't, what was left for us? The next few days passed in a haze. Ava tiptoed around me, her attempts to bridge the gap between us cautious and hesitant. I avoided her as much as I could, burying myself in work or finding excuses to leave the house. When we did cross paths, the air between us was thick with unspoken words. One evening, while Ava was upstairs, I sat in the living room scrolling through my phone. My finger hovered over her name in my contacts, tempted to scroll up to her messages, her call history, her emails. But I stopped myself. What was I hoping to find? Proof that her betrayal was deeper than she claimed? Or reassurance that it wasn't? I stared at the screen until my hand ached. Then, against my better judgment, I searched for the man I'd seen her with. His name came up quickly, Mark Taylor. A mutual friend had tagged him in photos from the party. His profile was full of polished, professional shots, the kind of man who knew how to present himself to the world. I studied his pictures, searching for something, anything that might explain what Ava saw in him. But all I felt was anger. He had a face, a name, a life. And he'd invaded mine without a second thought. I put the phone down, the rage simmering beneath the surface. If Ava thought she could repair this without me knowing the full truth, she was wrong. The next morning, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was any other day, but the tension in her shoulders told me she knew this wasn't over. How long were you planning on lying to me? I asked, leaning against the counter. Her eyes widened, and the mug clinked against the table as she set it down. What are you talking about? Mark, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. Who is he, really? She hesitated, her face paling. Ethan, I told you everything. Don't lie to me, Ava. My voice was sharp, and I saw her flinch. I need the truth. The whole truth. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking. It started a few months ago, she admitted. We met at a work event. He was charming, and I— And you what? I interrupted. Decided that was worth risking our marriage? Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't let up. How many times, Ava? Was this the first? Or just the first time I caught you? It was the first, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I swear, Ethan, it didn't go beyond what you saw. I stopped it before. Before what? I slammed my hand against the counter, and she jumped. Before it destroyed us? Because newsflash, Ava, it already has. Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't soothe the fire burning in my chest. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone with her guilt. That evening, I sat in the guest room, staring at my laptop. I'd spent hours reading about infidelity, how to cope, how to rebuild, how to confront. But none of it felt satisfying. None of it felt like enough. I needed more than apologies and empty promises. I needed her to feel the pain she caused me. A thought struck me, one I couldn't shake. What if I met with Mark? What if I looked him in the eye and demanded answers? He'd stolen something from me, something sacred. He owed me. Fueled by a mix of curiosity and anger, I messaged him through social media. It was short and to the point. We need to talk. You know who I am. Meet me at Greenridge Cafe tomorrow at noon. I didn't expect a response, but a reply came within minutes. Okay. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my heart pounding. Mark walked in a few minutes later, looking uneasy. He spotted me and hesitated before sitting across from me. Ethan, he said cautiously, I wasn't sure you'd show. I didn't waste time. What happened with Ava? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't planned. She was vulnerable. We connected at a party, and it got out of hand. Out of hand. I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. You call almost destroying my marriage out of hand? He looked down, guilt etched into his features. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Why didn't you stop it? He met my gaze, his expression sincere. Because I'm human, and so is she. His words hit like a punch, and for the first time, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to hate him, to hurt him, but he wasn't the only one to blame. That night, I told Ava I'd met Mark. Her face turned pale, and she stumbled over her words, but I stopped her. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because things are going to change. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. If we're going to fix this, it's going to be on my terms, I said. We're going to therapy, and you're cutting all ties with him. She nodded quickly. Of course, whatever it takes. But deep down, I wasn't sure therapy would be enough. The trust was gone, and rebuilding it felt impossible. The next few weeks were a blur of counseling sessions and awkward silences. Ava tried, pouring her heart into every session, but I could see the cracks in her resolve. She wanted to fix things, but the weight of her actions was too much. One evening, after another tense session, she broke down. Maybe you'll never forgive me, she said. Maybe I don't deserve it. I didn't respond. I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive her. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let her actions define me. I would find a way forward, with or without her. On a cold February morning, I woke up feeling lighter. The pain was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating. I sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee, and stared out at the snow-covered yard. Ava joined me, tentative as always. I'm going to be better, she said softly. For you. For us. I met her gaze, unsure if I believed her. But for the first time, I realized it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, my choices, my future. And for the first time, I felt ready to take the first step forward, whatever that meant.